So today we're going to be talking about virtual museums and 3D modeling using photogrammetry. Before we talk about photogrammetry, the purpose of our project was to try and create these digital 3D models that could be used for a digital archive for museums so that they can have a record of all the exhibits that go through their museum. For, if they want to go back and see how something was laid out, or if they need it for reference for an upcoming exhibit. Or these models could be used as images for a virtual gallery on a website. So if somebody across the world finds out that a museum is having an exhibit, they can go to that website and they can actually be in the exhibit and tour the exhibit without having to be at the physical location. So photogrammetry is basically the science of making measurements from photographs. What you do is you go and you take photos of an object and then you throw them in this software, and it will find matching points with each of the photos, and it will align them together to make one 3D image of the entire space. The measurements that you'll get from the process, they'll be as good as or as bad as the design of the structure that you're measuring. So if you were to do a model of this room, you would have a better chance of getting a good model out of it because it has a good defined structure. There are some problem things that you would have in here, but we'll talk about those types of things later. But if you have like a very smooth object and you want to make a 3D model of it, you'll have a harder time because there's not very many defining features on a smooth item. So the more identifying points you have in a structure or an object, the easier it is to create a model from it. There's a 4-step process. You do a point cloud, which that's your initial connecting points that the software will find, and it looks you can sometimes tell how your model is going to turn out just by that point cloud, but it looks really weird, like you don't really have anything at first. It's kind of like digging for treasure. You may find a piece, but you don't really know what all's under there. So then you build a dense cloud, which builds off of those initial points in your point cloud, and it creates a more dense look. You can kind of get a better picture of what you're going to get, and we'll show you these things later in the models that we have worked with. Then you create a mesh, and this is an example of what a mesh looks like. I guess y'all can't really see it out there because there's a lot of light coming through. But what we were trying to show you in this picture is the mesh. You can see the polygons that are being created by the geometry of the point cloud. So this can show you the depth, and it shows you how the building, or well, in our case, a building, it can be an object as well, how the program is creating the polygon to make the 3D form. And then at the very end, the very last step is to create the texture, which then produces your final model. So this will put, like, you'll be able to see if there's bumps on something, or if there's cut marks, if you're looking at a bone with cut marks or something like that.
So just to talk about photogrammetry a bit more, as Tobin mentioned, one of the most important things you need is good photos. And so light plays a huge factor in that. You need a lot of good lighting. Natural light works wonders. You want to try to minimize the shadow, but depending on what object you're replicating, natural light may not be an option, so you may need to use additional lighting. A high resolution camera will also help. We tend to use a 25 megapixel Nikon 610 DSLR. However, as the cameras on our phones get better and better, we've also gotten really good models just using our iPhone. The object surface, like Tobin mentioned, is hugely important. A really smooth surface may not replicate as well because you don't have that depth or that texture. And also something that's completely monotone may be a bit harder to image as well just because you don't have that depth or texture. If that happens, you might need to use what's called targets. So just like it sounds, it's this high contrast target that you lay on your object. So you'll see in our photos, we use them in the rooms that we're mapping. I've also used them on smaller objects as well. Another really important point is an overlapping photo. So the more overlap, the better. You're going to have a better chance of your model completely replicating. And that's the software that we use. It depends on overlapping photos. So like we said, the more overlap, the better. And then we do use PhotoScan, which is an auto-aligning 3D modeling software. It's relatively inexpensive, but there are free programs that you can use. There is a host of apps that were created by Autodesk, and one of those is called 123D Catch. So it's a free app that you can download on your phone or your tablet, and you can practice photogrammetry on your own free time if you would like. So just to give you a visual of what photogrammetry looks like. So this is the process. You will be moving around the object 360 degrees. So you'll see how the cameras are pointing inward at your feature of interest. So you're thinking about it, you're walking on the outside of an object. Right now, this is how a lot of cultural institutions, so like museums or heritage sites, this is how they're using photogrammetry. So if you log on to the Smithsonian's website, or if you go to Sketchfab and look up the British Museum, you will see some of their objects that have been created with 3D modeling. And if they're using photogrammetry, this is the process of how they did it. Another way they might have created those models is in laser scanning. We won't really get into that today, but that is an alternative to photogrammetry. It's just photogrammetry is a lot cheaper and a lot easier for you to do as an individual. So for us working at an institution with a small budget, this is a great approach for us to take to try and make our collections and our exhibits more accessible. So the first slide I showed you with how photogrammetry works is how normally people use photogrammetry. We're doing the exact opposite. So this is the method we take, where we are in the center and we're looking outward. So like as Tobin mentioned, if we were going to model this room, we would stand in the center and we would point the camera out so that we could get the entire room around us. And this does pose some problems, which we'll get into. But think about it as that you are inside the object shooting out as opposed to outside looking in.
And I'll mention one more thing. Even though Jessica mentioned that you would be standing in the middle of the room and taking the photos outward, that is what you're doing, but you actually have to move when you take the photos, because if you don't move, then your point of reference is always going to be the same spot. So as you move along, your point of reference changes so that the program can tell that there's more depth than if you were just to stand in one spot. I don't know if that makes sense, but basically you have to move. You can't just stand in one spot. Okay, so Changing Worlds Gallery was the very first gallery that we did. This is just kind of a floor plan of it, where you see the white spots in the middle. Those are diorama type things, but they're in the middle of the room. And then the white ones along the edges are dioramas, but they have acrylic facings. This is the final model that I got with this gallery, and I'm not really going to go into depth with this because it was just a test run. But we found that there were some problems with this gallery, and some of those problems were that the lighting was not good at all. And we had a problem with the walls because they're exactly like the wall back there. They're like the same color, and there's no texture on them. So that was an issue that we came across. And then the acrylic facings and the dioramas created a problem in some of the areas. There are also large skeletons in this gallery because it's a dinosaur gallery. and the castings are really dark. So the ceiling in that room is also black. So if you looked up towards the ceiling to shoot towards the top of the dinosaur, is really hard for the photogrammetry program to distinguish between where that dinosaur ended and where the ceiling started. And because the lighting was so bad, we had to change the shutter speed on the camera, and we had to get a really, really long exposure. But anytime you did that and shot up towards the ceiling, you got huge starbursts from the light. So I had to sit there and crop out every ceiling and every 240 something photos, going in and out of little dinosaur bones. It was not fun. So we just got frustrated, and we decided to move on from that one. Just decided it was a lost cause for that moment. And the other thing too is that room is a very complex shape. It has like little nooks, and then it has corners that you go around. So it was really kind of difficult just to figure out where to take the photos and how to get everything incorporated into it.
So next we move to the Talkington Gallery of Art, and this is the floor plan for that gallery. You'll see that by all appearances it looks much more simple. You know, it's just laid out. There's not any huge dioramas. There are some sculptures in the middle, which originally we thought might not be too bad because there's plenty of space around them. So that's why we selected this gallery overall, is because it seemed simple. There's also really great lighting because it does hold art. So these great LED lights, so it's pretty bright. And most of the art, like I said, is just on the walls. Another thing we didn't mention, though, at the beginning is we're really trying to push photogrammetry, trying to push what a museum can do with it. Like I said, we are working on a small budget. So that's why we picked a complicated gallery at first and then moved down to a less complicated gallery, because we're really trying to push the boundaries of what we can accomplish with photogrammetry. So this is, I don't know if it popped up. There it goes. A picture of when we were shooting in the gallery. We put up targets, so that's the black and white high resolution, to help us capture that blank wall space that's around the photos and the text panels. We did learn from trying to shoot the Dino Hall that you really do need the targets, that they help pick up that outer wall space. But if you utilize targets, especially in a space like this, you need to take all your photos during that time frame. Otherwise, you're going to have to try and place the targets in those exact same spots. So recreating your target layout can be really difficult when you're working on a larger room. So it's great to take all your photos at once, or be able to access that space all day if you need to go back and add some more photos. So we tried to move strategically around the room to get overlapping photos. We did use a tripod for the camera because we did have a slightly slower shutter speed, so we wanted the camera to stay still. We ended up taking 387 photos on our first time around the room. I took like a top down, bottom up, and side to side on the artwork. So we kind of went overboard with the photos. You don't need that many. And let me switch forward because we're running out of time. We also tried to use GPS imaging, or GPS coordinates, where we laid out arbitrary coordinates throughout the room, and so we incorporated that into PhotoScan. This is just a screenshot of what it looks like when you take pictures in a gallery space. So wherever you see those blue squares, that's where we were taking a picture. This was not the very first time we tried it. That's why there's less blue squares, definitely not 387. Because as you can see, you don't really need that many photos. You just do need them overlapping. So we wanted to give you all a visual of what that looks like. This runs through really quickly of the different steps. So let me go back one. So the point cloud that Tobin mentioned, the dense cloud, and then the mesh, and finally the texture. That's a huge positive of using photogrammetry, is you get that texture layer, so that realistic coloring of the space or the object that you're shooting.
If you noticed in that last one, you could actually see the walls defined from top to bottom all around. So this is one of our smaller things that I just happened to be in. We got asked to see if we could do a replication of a mural in another building on campus, and I had to take a group there as part of an event that I was helping with. And I just had my iPhone on me, and I just snapped 36 photos on my iPhone. And this is the point cloud. I don't think we've ever got a point cloud with that many points in it. This is the dense cloud view. The mesh, you can see there's not really any holes on the wall. And then this is the final product that we got from it. And it actually turned out really good. This is the best model we've had. It's all the way complete. And we were supposed to have PDFs that we could show you and move these around, but we don't have time, and we had a problem pulling them up. So, so some of the current obstacles that we have are wall texture. You can tell with the Peter HURD mural that because that photo, the walls were painted as a three-dimensional type mural, it was easier for the program to pick up dimension. So it's like picking up false dimension. And that's why we were able to pick up the entire thing and get the entire wall and not have holes in it. The shape of a room definitely plays a factor in how good of a model you'll get. This is the Peter HURD mural was so simple, it was just a little circle. But all the other ones, they have like little turns and corners and things of that nature, so it's really hard to get those to where they line up properly. In the Talkington gallery, the floor was a wood panel floor, and there was a lot of reflection from the light in the ceiling. So we had good light, but then we had a floor that reflected it. So that was really difficult. We had a hard time picking up the floor because of that. And then we also feel like there are software limitations with photogrammetry because photogrammetry is typically looking in on an object and we're looking out towards the object. So we feel like that there's a problem with the program being able to interpret that change of perspective.
And I won't really go into our future plans because we are out of time, but we do have some future plans on how to improve our capturing methods so that we can get this on the website available for people to view. But we'll happily answer questions or talk to y'all throughout the day. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Tobin and Jessica. Our next panelist is Lynn Dow.
Hello. Hi, how is everybody doing today? Cool. So my name is Ling Dao. I am from the University of Texas at Arlington. I'm doing my MFA there. So my concentration is on game design development. So I'm going to present to you today my research from a game developer point of view. And the name of the research is Possibility of Virtual Reality as an Art Therapy Material. And to start with, virtual reality isn't a new thing, so it's been around for a while. But only recently that it's been a little more affordable. So if you are not very familiar with it, the two devices that are most popular right now is the Oculus Rift and then the VIV. Both of them are available for ordering online. If you want to try out the VIV, you can go to participating GameStop, which I'm sure in Boston there's a whole lot, and then to try out a demo. And then with all of that development, interacting with technology means that we get involved emotionally, physically, and sensually. So as in terms of how far we've gone, virtual reality is as close to magic as a technology could be. And my suggestion is that virtual reality could be more than just a peripheral for video games, and I do love playing video games. But I also do get tired of playing first-person shooter game, and I think that women can also participate in playing video games, and there also should be application for other purposes. So that's where art therapy come in. In terms of art therapy, I was really interested in clay, which is a traditional art therapy material. Since the beginning of time, humans have been experiencing with clay in order to create a tool for use. And then because of its flexible and really fluid nature, clay has become sort of like a gateway for human to express their inner feelings, and then also like a dimension in terms of spirituality in a lot of culture. And that's where art therapy comes in. Psychotherapists and art therapists have found out that while working with clay, it's easier for the patient to open up about their emotions. So their difficulties in daily life, and then also clay could also help people heal. So the application that I developed is a virtual reality clay work. So you work with clay, you model, but in a virtual reality environment. And that's what you are going to see when you wear the headset. So the VIV headset is consisting of a headset, 2 sensors that's going to detect your motion when you are in the play area, which is about 2 to 3 feet. And then you also need like sort of like a monster computer that's gonna help you run that. So, and it runs at 90 frames per second, so about 3 times more powerful than the regular gaming computer that you see on the market. So this application is built on some of the very basic feature of traditional art therapy. The first thing is the experience of touch, movement, and the 3-dimensional aspect of clay work. So in this application, you are going to model using the controller. So you can sort of like sculpt like an object. So that helps you tell the story. So it takes advantage of that. And then the second thing is a reflection of the constructive and deconstructive process. So instead of just modeling, you can also destroy the mesh and then reset the mesh, so you can remodel again over and over again. And then the third thing is a regression process. So the materials that you are going to be working with in this application of mine is very fluid, and this is a low poly model. So with a higher poly model, you will be able to make your model a little more specific and more reflective of whatever objects that you want to convey. And the meaning of the regression process is that the fluid material will bring out your memory of childhood and sexual intimacy. So that's some of the very basic quality of clay that other material do not have. However, this application is not very traditional in that you are actually using controller to work with it. So it also have sort of like additional feature, and one of that is the smart clay, is that the therapist can adjust the quality of the clay. So it could be as fluid as you want it to be, or it could be a little more dense and thick. It could also be a combination of 2 or more material, in that you can also draw on top of it. So not just regular clay, but it can also be sort of like a canvas for drawing exercise. The second thing is that in this virtual environment, individuals who are bedridden and who would like to do the exercise in a different location can take advantage of that. With traditional clay, you have to go to an art therapy office, and then you have to sit there and work with the therapist. With that application, you can do it at home while communicating with the therapist, maybe online or on the phone. The third thing is that the digital touch is alternative to the traditional touch, so it could really help patients who have a hand condition. So if your knuckle hurt when you work with clay, or if you don't have enough strength to work with an actual clay mesh, then you can also use this application. And the last thing is that since this application is digital, you can also store the mesh, and you can also use it to print out an actual mesh through the 3D printer. And the way I do it is actually very simple. There's the button for export, and once you do it, the program will create a folder and then save a file there. So you can just run it through a printer and it print out for you. So, and from the therapist's point of view, he or she can also very easily store it. So instead of having to take picture of each time you take part in the exercise, they could have like a database in which they can print it out when they want to. So during the development stage for this program, what I did is I have surveys along the way, and I also have survey for this first prototype of mine. So I present 20 student participants with both versions of this program, so on the PC and on the VIV. The students were asked to bring in each section with the issues that were concerning them that particular week, so whatever were like uncomfortable for them or weighing them down. And then after uses experience, the student were asked to talk about it and then asked to rate the experience in terms of immersion, effectiveness in terms of helping them opening up and coping with their issues, and then the need for an art therapist. And the outcome I got from the survey was actually very interesting. Most of my student participants were very impressed at how real the experience feels because they are completely in a different space. However, most of them say that it's really hard to concentrate on talking to the therapist while working on the experience because they feel like they are completely kind of like alone. However, some of them feel that it's better for them to talk in this way because it's so calm. So they can talk about their experience in more clarified terms. In terms of art therapy materials, they say that this material is almost a new material of its own. So it resembles clay in very limited terms. It almost feels like they're playing video games instead of actually doing clay work, so that was interesting. They also said that it will be more effective if there's an actual therapist presenting inside the space instead of a therapist outside of the space talking to them. So my conclusion for this stage of development with my program is that I think virtual reality has the huge potential for becoming the next art therapy material. But at the same time, I think it's very difficult for including the art therapist in that. So that's something that I need to work on. So yeah, thank you for listening.
Thank you, Lynn. Our final panelist is Britton.
Thank you. All right, so I am Britton Horn. I'm a PhD student at Northeastern University in computer science, and my research area is in procedural content generation, which is just making things that make things. And so I'm going to talk about one of the systems that I created here that produces 3D printed vases from images as source inspiration. So here, here are the rest of the authors on this paper and the project team. So we have people from computer science and art and design that have kind of come together to help this project actually work. So our motivation here, we really wanted to kind of understand a little bit better how people can take some information from nature or some other kind of source domain and actually manifest the same kind of emotion and feelings they get in a different domain. And so this is really the inspiration process. It's a very small piece of the creative process, but it's still one that's very important and is put to practice in many different ways. I have a couple examples here, Monet's Haystacks and Vivaldi's Four Seasons. These are both areas where the painter or composer takes nature, it takes the feelings of nature and will actually put them into their specific art domain that they're experienced in. And this is something that is extremely complex and computers just don't do very well. So we wanted to explore this and see if we could get kind of at the details on how it worked and see if we could get a computer to do the same thing. So the overall idea for how to put this into a computational form was that we really wanted the final product, the final 3D printed vase, to store some sort of emotion in its actual physical nature. And much in the same way that a song kind of stores the light, the activity and so forth of nature, we want to do the same thing with the vase. So this is done in 3 steps. The first thing we do is we look at our source domain, which in our case we're just using color. After that, then we do an abstract translation or just a generalization that we don't want the system to anymore, we don't want it to think about color, we want it to actually move on to a kind of a higher or meta level thinking. And then it can take that information and actually put it into your final target domain, which for us is going to be 3-dimensional printed vases. The reason that we chose color in vases are we wanted 2 very distinct domains, but ones that are very, very simple in their respective categories, just so that there wasn't as much kind of outside context that needed to be handled. So this is the overall kind of system design in a little bit more graphical form. So you can see it on the left side, start out with an image, move on to kind of the analysis piece where it extracts the colors from that image, translates them into, well, at the bottom there we have activity, warmth, weight, and hardness. I'll get into those in a little bit. And then it'll actually do a genetic evolution for the vases, which is really where you start out with a random population of vases, kind of mate them, breed them, evolve them, and so forth, until you get to a vase that is appropriate or that the system feels comfortable, matches what it's trying to produce. So the first thing, which is kind of, I would say, the most important piece and really where this sort of generation process is different from others, is this middle aesthetic translation portion. So the way that we wanted to bridge our 2 domains is we wanted to use some vocabulary that everyone experiences in similar ways, things that were not as much open to interpretation as some other words or semantics. Obviously, this is a very small set. We could enlarge it. We can use many different things, but this is kind of what we started with for our first initial go at it. And this is activity, warmth, weight, and hardness. And so, for example, weight is something that everyone experiences in the same way. Whenever something is heavy, it is always heavy. When something is extremely light or lighter than another object in comparison, we can tell that they're different, and everyone can tell them kind of in the same way. Much in the same way as warmth, people know when things are hot and when things are cold. There's not much interpretation there. So the way that we get to those 4 what we call aesthetic principles, or the overall aesthetic profile of an image, the way that we're going to do this is we're going to do a little bit of kind of color extraction. So here, there are many different pieces to images. We focus on color just because that is kind of the most basic. So the first thing that happens is there's just a color palette extraction, and there are 2 pieces to this. There are the dominant colors and the salient colors. Dominant is just what the most number of pixels per color in your image, and then salient are the things that are the most different from average, and so they're kind of the most eye-popping things. I have some color stuff here. Hopefully you can see it. So this is an example where you see, dominant is pretty obvious. You have a lot of yellows, a lot of blues, a lot of greens, very obvious. In the middle you have salient, and these are the ones that actually kind of pop out at your eye. Sometimes they are also dominant, as you see with the yellows, but then also they may not be, as there's kind of that red stripe in the middle of the, I guess, the most forefront flower. So this kind of gave us some promising results. We liked what we saw. I was really happy to see that the red was picked up and came forward as well as it did. Have some other examples. I can probably just rush through these, but overall we see that the color extraction process worked pretty well. So once we have the colors, then we actually need to put them into our kind of generalized vocabulary. And so to do that, we were actually able to lean on some previous color science work that has come out of China and Japan for the most part. But there have been many different studies that have tried to kind of put into words what colors mean for different cultures. And so these were 4 measures that have actually been used in the past, and so we kind of just used them as is and went from there. One issue is that all of these equations are for single colors, and we're looking at color palettes. So the way that we kind of worked with this is the most dominant and the most salient color get the highest weight for the value for each one of these, and then as the colors go down in dominance or in salience, the weight goes down. And this actually, research from the same color scientists that we used, their later research actually did the same thing when they were looking at color palette emotion. So we feel pretty confident about the method that we chose for that. So once the image has been analyzed, it's been generalized to those 4 principles, aesthetic principles, then we actually get into the vase creation piece. And so at this point, the system is going to try and create a vase that matches the same values that the image had for its colors. And so the way that this is done is the system kind of thinks of vases in a very 2-dimensional aspect, and so it's just 2 lines around a center y-axis, and it spins the vase. We chose this just because it's a very rudimentary vase creation process. You can think of this as kind of spinning a pot on a turntable. Same thing. And so the way that the evolution works, I can get into this in more detail with you guys afterwards if you want to talk about it. But essentially, a vase starts out as 2 just straight lines, what you see in the top left. And then there are a bunch of random operations that are performed, which are squeezes, stretches, pulls, shortens, all kinds of stuff. And so you get some pretty different things when you do that. And what happens at that point is these different vases, based on how they score on all those 4 aesthetic measures, we would kind of morph them and merge them to get to a better result. So the way that that's done, the way that the aesthetic numbers are analyzed had not been completed yet. So what we had to do is we actually had to figure out, much like colors, where we could just say, here's an equation, you get activity or warmth or whatever based on a color value. We had to do the same thing for vases. And so since there was nothing out there, we put out a survey, and we basically showed people 2 vases, and we said, is the left one more active or the right one more active? Are they both active? Neither, so forth. And we showed this to both artists and non-artists, and we actually were really interested to see that the results were not different for those 2 groups. But in the end, what you get here is, so this is an example of activity, where the top row are the vases that were seen as the most active, and the bottom are vases that are seen as the least active. And I'll go through all 4 of them, I guess. So we have weight here as well. Again, top is the most weight value, bottom is the least weight value. Here's warmth and hardness. And so we were really excited by these results because visually we could see that the vases on the top half were very similar and also quite different from the ones on the bottom half, which were also pretty similar as well. But we had to do a little bit more than just by the eye. We had to actually go through and do a feature selection and some linear regression to determine, when given a vase, actually what the values are. So these were the features that we were looking at, a lot of different ratios and symmetries and things like that. So once we ran it through our feature selection process, these are the things that stood out for each one of the aesthetic measures. And so for example, with activity, we get things that are very pointy, very asymmetrical. The sampling rate, by the way, is essentially the number of points in the base. So like I was saying, the two lines are interpolated around a center axis, so it's just kind of how many times that happens. Weight, you get a very low center of gravity. You get a big ratio between the kind of the minimum width and the height and things like that. And if you really want the specifics, here they are. We'll skip that. And then also, so now that we have the values, we can actually do the genetic evolution piece, and so that's what this is talking about. We start out with 100 random vases. They're just randomly kind of squeezed, pulled, and so forth. And then as each step of the process goes along, they're merged until finally a vase that is as close to the 4 numbers that we get from the image as possible. Once we get there, the system says, okay, we're close enough. Here's a vase that I think represents the colors from the image as best as I can. And so here are kind of just 3 real quick examples that kind of show the whole process. So on the left, you have the input images that the system used. The middle is the color palette that comes out of it, and then on the right, you have the actual one example vase that is produced by it, and some of the kind of defining qualities of that color palette and vase on the far side. And so these are all kind of rendered vases. They are actually 3D printable, and so here's kind of an example where one of the people on our project decided to give out vases from a family portrait because they had a new baby in the family. So he gave out these vases that were depictions of the family portrait for all his family for gifts. But the thing that we really enjoyed with these results on the far right there is that this is a very kind of one-off process that is not really done in procedural content generation very, very often. Normally you have, here's the input, here's the output, very linear relationship. Even if you're taking inputs from a different domain, such as your environment with temperature sensors or motion detectors, that sort of thing. When the content that is actually created in the end, when that process happens, it's still a very one-to-one thing. So you have higher temperature in your environment, then you get more red, or you get bigger circles or something like that in the final output. But what we're doing is a little bit more abstract. And so with that, there's always the danger that something gets lost in translation. And so we were really happy to see here that all of these vases fit a very similar profile. They're all they're different and unique in a way that no 2 vases are alike. However, they're all kind of in the same family. They're all very round, they're all very warm, and they're all extremely active, which is reflective of the kind of reds and white of the color, which white's a background. That's a little bit of a limitation of the system. It does use every color, and the background can be pretty dominant in that sort of analysis. So we do want to look at that and try and make that a little bit better. I won't go into too much detail on future work and validation studies. But essentially, we really want to make this system a little bit more robust. We want to take into account more things than color. We want to look at composition. We want to look at shape. We also want to look at other domains as well. So we have some in the works for looking at music generation and things like that. So we do want to kind of expand it and see what works, what domains kind of lend themselves to this easily and what don't. And we also want to look at the abstraction process and see what other kind of qualities we can look at and evaluate content based on to see which ones are really good for kind of crossing domains. Because some that we think that are a little bit more physical, a little bit more basic to the kind of the human experience, we think are better at it, but we'd like to use some others and see if that's really true. All right, I'll go ahead and stop here. Thank you.
Thank you, Britton, and now we'll open up the floor for your questions. Yep, back there. Oh, that was you. Just turn around.
Oh, sorry, for the museum visualization, now that Facebook is releasing this 360-degree visual camera, which is supposedly very good for VR and for mapping these kind of rooms, have you looked into using that kind of thing at all, or would that just be?
No, we actually talked about that last week because I've been seeing it pop up on more of the pages that I follow, especially a page out of Egypt because I find Egyptian history fascinating. And so I saw that they were using it over and over, and I hadn't yet heard about that Facebook update. So when I did some searching and I went to the Facebook 360 page, sent it to Tobin, it is something that we want to try. It's just I honestly heard about it 2 weeks ago and we talked about it last week. So definitely we want to give that a shot and see how that goes. The only downfall I can see right now is that you can't really zoom in. So when you use that Facebook 360, it is cool that you can move your phone around or scroll, but it's a side to side, a little bit up down. There's not a zoom in feature. With what we're doing, you can zoom in. You may not be able to get as close to like touching it as you might want to, but you can get pretty close and see that fine detail. So if that is a new rollout that Facebook does at some point, then yeah, I think it'll be a huge contender to what we're doing. But right now, the level of detail we can get with photogrammetry is better than the Facebook 360.
Yeah, and you could actually move through our models. You can't move through those Facebook ones.
You approach museums and you're basically saying, we want to come in, take pictures of everything to provide an avenue for people not to go into your, because obviously they're going to get money from people that, go into the MFA or go into the MoMA. And I'm not saying you're taking them out of that or you're taking away money, but you're obviously providing them a new, avenue. But do you guys get any outlash? And if so, like how do you try to, spin it around and say this will actually benefit your museum?
So in the instance of the museum that we work at, that's not a problem because it's a free museum anyways. There isn't that you can make that argument, but at the same time, those museums that are charging are putting on online exhibits anyways. So in effect, they're still showing you things via the web. It just may not be a physical space that they're portraying in that visualization. So I think if they want to make an argument for them not seeing the physical space, then maybe yes. But as far as allowing access to a collection, it's kind of the same thing in my opinion. But as a museum, you are required to be able to provide access to anybody and everybody. That is part of being a museum. But yeah, as far as like the monetary aspect, that doesn't affect us. Now, it would affect visitor numbers, but you can also account for that on a web, a site visit count or something of that nature.
Yeah, and the other thing I would add is that, if you're located here in Boston, someone from Canada may not be able to come visit your museum, even though that's relatively close if you think about it compared to China or somewhere in Africa. But if you have that on your website, then they can visit you in that virtual sense. So you're still increasing accessibility, just maybe in a different way. But certainly for some people in the profession, what you're talking about is a concern for them. And I think for us, it just comes back to accessibility, democratizing the experience. That's an important focus of what we do. But I don't think it limits or detracts from revenue. I think it can add to it because you're giving them a new value-added service.
I actually have a couple of questions, but for Jessica and Tobin, since we've been on you, I was actually thinking, I'm an anthropologist, so I was thinking about the applications here for a lot of archaeological sites and historical sites like UNESCO World Heritage sites, which may be very fragile. And you could report this, one of the big problems with 3D mapping I know that we have right now with like going into cave systems where Neanderthals live and that kind of thing, is that you can't zoom in and you can't manipulate these images. They're not really useful for really in-depth research, right, beyond just knowing how things are laid out. And so having a system like this that would allow people, for people to go to places that they shouldn't be going, like we don't want you to go inside the pyramids, for example, or B, for researchers who need to have this really high-level quality images in order to be able to understand these spaces, but recognizing the deep impacts that we have when just the minute we walk into one of those sites, or the fact that they might get destroyed.
Nonprofit right now called SciArc. If you haven't heard of it, look up their work. It's incredible. They're working on Project 500, which is to digitize 500 World Heritage sites from around the globe, so not focusing on any one country. And I think what's important is that if museums and cultural institutions don't offer this sort of service, people are going to do it anyway. And so that's why we've seen a nonprofit like SciArc, 123D Catch, where you can technically walk in, and as long as you can take a photo, you can create your own models when you're visiting that museum. So that's, for me and Tobin both, why we're trying to push our institution to get out there and do it and go ahead and offer it, because I really feel that our visitors are going to expect that sort of interaction. And like you mentioned, with things being fragile, that's a huge argument as to why a museum or a heritage site would want to put that out there, is because while we want people to have access, we have to think about the integrity of that object, that artifact, or that site. And if we allow people to come through and destroy it, then it's not there for future generations. So I'm not saying close anything off. I'm just saying, you know, this adds another layer of interaction and accessibility that we can have in the long term. So I completely agree. Yeah.
I'm just going to add to that. The class that we took about this was actually put together by an archaeologist that we work with, and he does a lot of 3D image creation of sites that they're digging at. And you can scroll over and read about things. But somebody else that we know, they're using it as a means to image bone and things of that nature. So if like a bone has a cut mark, like a bison bone has a cut mark, you can actually get a proper measurement in the photogrammetry program of the size of that cut mark and things of that nature. So you're also able to send that off to researchers, and they can manipulate it there on their computer instead of having to come to your museum and either hold the object, which you might not want them to hold because it may be fragile, or you can 3D print it and have them access it that way. So there's a lot of different applications for it in a museum and for archaeology. I just decided to be difficult in the project that I chose for his class and do the gallery spaces. And that's just like, we've just tried to push it further to figure out how to actually make that work. So.
Great. And then I had a question for Britton. I was really interested in your translation of visual art into, different kinds of art and seeing how they experience those objects. Do they have similar responses?
No, we have not. I think that's a fantastic idea. Yeah, because there's definitely, I said that we were using a translation vocabulary that is supposed to be kind of global, that anyone can use. But when you're talking about people who have certain kinds of disabilities, especially with some of their senses, then very much that may not be true. And so I think that would be a very interesting group to study and see how exactly that affects them.
So I have two sort of linked questions for you, building off that. So the source material that you used was visual, right? Have you considered, or do you think that it would be valid to use source data that was like textual or numeric or less sort of sensory? And then related question, once you have this sort of cross-domain translation, you have the two objects, either for formal validation or just in terms of aesthetic theory, do you think that the latter stands more in terms of juxtaposition to the original, or can you see that being sort of a substantial piece on its own without the original being present? If someone can't experience it, or just to separate the two as a new aesthetic experience.
Right, so I would say that it really is supposed to be something that's on its own. That was our idea, at least initially. So if you think of Monet's haystacks, the experience of the image is something that is distinct and unique to itself. You don't need to be somebody who's experienced the actual, really even the season or the actual haystack or whatever that he was painting there. It's something that's its own thing. And I think that this sort of a process is something that should follow something similar. I really would like the produced stuff to be unique, but at the same time, when you put the two together, you should be able to see the similarities. You should be able to see some sort of a connection, but it's still something that's unique. And remind me of the first question.
It was just like what sorts of other inputs?
Right. Okay. So we are looking at output for music generation currently, but we definitely want to look at other inputs as well. One thing that we could do, I mean, there are plenty of image generation algorithms out there. We may even just reverse this flow and take in laser scanned 3D vases and run the same sort of process, but in reverse, and see what kind of images come out of that. But yeah, there's definitely a lot of opportunity for domains to be used for this.
It's very provocative, showing us what's likely to be around the corner in several different areas. I have a question for the museums panel, and I'm thinking about the Google process where you can actually zoom through a museum and inspect those things. How do you see your initiative fitting with this massively well-funded and nearly worldwide initiative on the part of Google to make museums available and have people navigate through them at their own pace?
So one of our main arguments is that with photogrammetry, you can do it in-house on a relatively low and cheap budget. And Google will offer that service for free to the museum, so that is cheaper than cheap. However, I haven't seen the contract and the agreement between the museum and Google, and so one thing that is important to museums is retaining their PR and how they look. And ownership. That word's kind of scary though to some people, but retaining your image. And so while I think the Google project is great, for our museum right now, that's not an option. We're also a university museum, so there's a lot of additional layers to go through as opposed if you're just a public or a private museum. So for us, photogrammetry is one of the best ways to get stuff out and on the website, because it is something that we can do in-house in our spare time while we're not working on other projects. But I think the Google project is a reflection of our visitors and our publics wanting more access. So I think as a museum, we need to look at that and think about how we can change our practice to keep up and then maybe get ahead of that curve. So I think our project is just an alternative that for a museum that may be iffy about that partnership, this is a way to share your museum spaces and your artifacts for a relatively cheap way to accomplish it.
Thank you. You know, the virtual reality that we heard about in the psychotherapeutic modalities, you can actually put on some sort of helmet and figuratively dive into the object. If I could, I would like to ask about the virtual reality. So, it was heavily visual, but could you imagine, for example, group therapy or other sorts of therapies being delivered through a VR modality? Is that anything that you see on the horizon? I'll ask again later.
seen a lot of therapeutic art, and some of them are not. So I mean, people have been working on it, but it's not really for the public yet. So I guess that's why we don't hear about it a whole lot. But I suspect that as the device gets cheaper and cheaper, it will be more available.
Thank you everyone for all of your questions, and thank you again to our